In March 2024, antique dealer Rebecca Martinez made a discovery that would slowly uncover one of Chicago's most carefully hidden family secrets. While cataloging items from the Ashford estate auction on the city's North Shore, she came across a formal family portrait from 1925. The photograph showed a wealthy family of four posed in their elegant living room. William Ashford, a successful Chicago businessman, sat confidently in a leather armchair wearing a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. His wife Catherine stood gracefully beside him in an expensive silk dress, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of their 12-year-old son Thomas. Their daughter Eleanor, who looked about 10 years old, stood a little apart from the group. Along the bottom edge of the photograph was the embossed mark of Hartman and Associates Fine Photography, Chicago. For its time, the image quality was impressive, with carefully controlled lighting, balanced composition, and clear details of clothing, furniture, and fabrics that spoke of refined wealth. The portrait had been kept behind glass in a protective frame and remained in excellent condition despite its age. Rebecca specialized in early American photography and recognized the work of a high-end studio. She bought the portrait for her gallery, intending to research its background and perhaps sell it to collectors interested in 1920s Chicago history. The Ashford name was well known in the city. William had built his fortune through construction and real estate during Chicago's rapid expansion in the early 20th century, and the family had been prominent in social circles during the Prohibition years. What Rebecca could not have known was that the portrait held evidence of a carefully buried secret. Back at her gallery, she began her usual authentication process with a high-resolution digital scanner. The silver gelatin print measured 12 by 16 inches and showed none of the typical deterioration expected from photographs of that era. No silvering, no chemical staining, and no physical damage. The scan revealed extraordinary detail: the texture of William's wool suit, the delicate beadwork on Catherine's dress, and even the grain of the wooden furniture. At 200% magnification, the image remained sharp and natural. At 400%, she could examine each family member clearly. William looked confident and prosperous. Catherine projected refined elegance. Young Thomas stood with the slightly awkward formality common in children posed for formal portraits. It was at 600% magnification that Rebecca first noticed something unusual about Eleanor. Her pose and clothing were appropriate, yet her smile looked forced and lacked the natural ease of the others. At 800%, focused on Eleanor's face, the child's eyes revealed a vacant, distant quality, as if she were looking past the camera rather than at it. Rebecca had examined thousands of period photographs and had never seen this expression in a child's formal portrait. The advanced quality of the image had captured details invisible to people in 1925. The discovery prompted her to research the Ashford family more thoroughly. At the Chicago History Museum and in newspaper archives, she found that the Ashfords had been significant figures in the city's society during the 1920s. Williams' construction company played a major role in the growth of the North Shore suburbs. Contemporary accounts portrayed them as model citizens. Catherine appeared regularly at charity events, and William was often quoted in business pages. Yet gaps appeared in the public record during the mid-1920s. After 1924, the family's public appearances became notably less frequent, especially those involving the children. School records from the prestigious Francis W. Parker School showed that Eleanor's attendance grew irregular during the 1924 to 1925 academic year, with frequent absences attributed to health concerns and family obligations. Payment records preserved in Williams' business files revealed substantial fees paid to private tutors, educational consultants, and medical specialists. Most striking were regular payments to Dr. Marcus Reinhardt, a physician who specialized in childhood nervous disorders and claimed training from Vienna. The same records showed monthly payments throughout 1925 to Hartman and Associates, far more than the cost of a single family portrait session. Rebecca contacted the Chicago Medical Historical Society. Chief Archivist Dr. Patricia Kowalski provided disturbing background. Reinhardt belonged to a movement in 1920s medicine that believed children from wealthy families often developed constitutional softness that would handicap them in adult life. He promoted intensive psychological conditioning combined with pharmaceutical intervention, describing his approach as psycho-constitutional reconditioning. His practice catered exclusively to children of the elite. Contemporary medical papers by Reinhardt described using prolonged isolation, controlled food restriction, sleep deprivation, sedatives, stimulants, and exercises designed to break down a child's natural resistance to authority. He insisted that careful photographic documentation was essential for monitoring progress, claiming that subtle changes in facial expression and posture revealed whether the conditioning was working. Letters between Reinhardt and William Ashford from March 1925 confirmed the connection. In one letter, Reinhardt wrote that Eleanor continued to show resistance, but that recent photographs suggested she was beginning to achieve the constitutional compliance necessary for social integration. William's reply a few days later expressed growing concern. Eleanor had become withdrawn and unresponsive, and the parents saw none of the improvement originally promised. They requested a full evaluation and consideration of other approaches. Further research showed that Hartman and Associates was not an ordinary portrait studio. Founded in 1924 by Hermann Hartmann, who had immigrated from Germany the previous year with advanced photographic equipment, the studio specialized in what it called scientific documentation photography and behavioral analysis imaging. It advertised mainly in medical journals and served a small but extremely wealthy client list, almost all families whose children were under Reinhardt's care. The monthly sessions with the Ashfords lasted several hours and followed detailed protocols specifying poses, lighting, and camera settings meant to capture compliance markers and resistance indicators. Eleanor's formal family portrait was one carefully staged product of this system. The specialized lenses and experimental camera systems allowed Reinhardt to analyze details invisible to the naked eye. Rebecca learned that Eleanor was not Reinhardt's only patient. Between 1924 and 1927, he treated children from at least 12 other prominent Chicago families. The pattern was consistent. Wealthy parents worried about behavioral problems or character weaknesses engaged his services. He convinced them that intensive conditioning was necessary to develop the mental toughness required for future leadership. Throughout the process, Hartman and Associates produced precise photographic records that served multiple purposes: diagnostic information for the doctor, scientific-looking evidence for the parents, and a systematic record of the changes being forced on the children. Correspondence with other families revealed the same gradual realization. One mother wrote that her daughter had become entirely different, no longer speaking spontaneously, showing no interest in former joys, and responding with a vacant compliance that terrified her. By the time many parents recognized the harm, the damage was often irreversible. By 1926, concerns began to surface within Chicago's medical community. Respected pediatrician Dr. James Morrison and several colleagues examined some of Reinhardt's former patients and documented symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma, emotional flattening, social withdrawal, and abnormal compliance. They filed a formal complaint accusing Reinhardt of practicing without proper credentials, using dangerous pharmaceutical interventions, and employing conditioning techniques that amounted to systematic abuse. The investigation was hampered by the destruction of evidence. When authorities sought Reinhardt's medical records, most had already been removed. Hartman and Associates closed their studio and disposed of their photographic archives. Both men disappeared from Chicago in early 1927, apparently warned by allies. No criminal charges were brought. The social status of the families involved and their reluctance to testify publicly played a large part. The case was quietly closed and treated as a regrettable episode of experimental medicine rather than criminal abuse. Eleanor never returned to regular classroom education. She continued private tutoring at home with frequent notes about special educational needs. After Reinhardt's disappearance, she received psychiatric care focused on recovery from trauma rather than further conditioning. She lived with her parents until William's death in 1954 and Catherine's in 1961, never married, and established no independent household. Neighbors from the North Shore mansion, interviewed decades later, described her as quiet, withdrawn, and polite, but distant, as if she always lived somewhere else in her mind. She showed little interest in the social or charitable activities expected of women of her class and generation, becoming increasingly reclusive. Among papers from the estate sale, Rebecca found a journal entry Eleanor wrote in 1963 when she was in her late 40s. In it, she wondered what kind of person she might have been if the treatments had not tried to fix her. The treatments were supposed to make her stronger, she wrote, but they took away something essential that she could never regain. She remembered being a different child before 1925, yet that earlier self now felt like someone she had once known rather than who she used to be. Rebecca's research showed that Reinhardt's practice in Chicago was part of a wider movement in American medicine during the 1920s. Similar experimental treatments targeting children of the elite appeared in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Los Angeles. They were marketed as advanced European methods for developing psychological resilience in children who would inherit positions of leadership. The movement drew on early psychology, eugenics ideas, and anxieties about the effects of wealth on character. Professional photographers with specialized equipment worked with the doctors in other cities as well, creating visual records that gave the appearance of scientific rigor. Modern child psychology recognizes these techniques as forms of systematic psychological torture that cause severe developmental trauma. At the time, however, the medical profession lacked the understanding to grasp the long-term harm. The practices largely ended by the early 1930s as awareness grew and attitudes toward child development changed, yet the damage to hundreds of children remained. The formal family portrait Rebecca found had hung proudly in the Ashford mansion for decades. Under ordinary viewing, it appeared to celebrate a prosperous and successful family. Under modern magnification, it revealed the hollow look in Eleanor's eyes, the visual evidence of constitutional compliance that Reinhardt claimed as success. The photograph had served both as a family keepsake and as documentation of the systematic destruction of a child's natural vitality and capacity for emotional connection. Eleanor's long life of emotional isolation and quiet awareness of what had been taken from her stood as lasting proof of the consequences. The portrait now serves as a memorial to her and to the other children who suffered under similar treatments, ensuring that this dark chapter in American medical history is no longer forgotten.